Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie Herbert, and my practicum looked at the correlation and relationship between being a military veteran and tobacco and substance use. Now, almost 1 in 3 U.S. military veterans smoke cigarettes or uses some other form of tobacco. And this is according to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Although the prevalence of smoking has declined amongst U.S. adults, there are opportunities to further reduce smoking among U.S. veterans, particularly or young veterans. Using data from the 2021 Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, or BRFSS, we estimated prevalence of smoking among U.S. veterans with disabilities and compared it to that of persons who also served in the U.S. Armed Forces, however, reported no disabilities and were all self-reported. A description of the design and sampling procedures of BRFS is also available on the CDC's website. The BRFS is a state-based surveillance system that collects data on many of the behaviors and conditions that place adults ages 18 and above at risk for chronic disease. And tobacco cessation benefits covers treatments for all forms of tobacco use, including cigarettes, electronic cigarettes, smokeless tobaccos. However, not all who served are eligible for care. Now, when we talk about disability, the term disability, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is a physical or mental condition that limits the person's movement, senses, or activities. We examined the association between having served in the military and the risk of tobacco and substance use and psychological distress using this behavioral risk factors surveillance system. The study also describes the significant health burdens of cigarette smoking, and other tobacco and substance use amongst U.S. veterans with and without disability. Some of the methods. Our study cohort, we took the data from, data was analyzed from the 2021 Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System administered by the CDC, and the link between tobacco products, disability type, and functional problems was investigated using weighted regression models. Our participants included only those adults who specified that they had served in the military at some point in their lives. And our total sample was 52,518 adults between the ages of 18 to 65 years. And they also responded to the survey. And when we deducted those with disability, we found that there was 20,295 persons that responded saying that they had a disability. What we found was that our study sample had a huge amount of male participants at 86.8%. 71.3% of them were white or Caucasian, and 13.6% of them were African Americans. Of the total sample, there was only 36.8% in the 20,295 sample that was extrapolated to represent the 8.4 million people that we are trying to show represents here. The veterans currently with disability were more likely to be current users at when we looked at the adjusted ratio, it was 2.6 and with a p-value of 0.001. or the former adjusted ratio of 1.66 with a p-value of less than 0.001 cigarette smokers, but less likely to be former end users. And looking at the adjusted ratio, it was at 0.66 with the p-value of less than 0.0001. We found that veterans with disability versus without disability were more likely to also be dual users, and that's dual users with cigarettes and ends. That's electronic cigarettes. And that had an odds ratio of 3.2 with a p-value of 0.0364. The data also showed that veterans with disabilities were more likely to smoke cannabis. Even though that's not significantly significant, it just shows that veterans were more likely to experiment and try other things. So some of the strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and limitations of our study. First, the BRFSS data comes from a telephone-based survey, and the data excludes institutionalized individuals, for example, those in prisons or nursing home facilities, and this may have caused prevalence rates to be underestimated. The second limitation is that the data is self-reported, which is also subject to recall bias, as 54.5% of our participants were between the ages of 65 years old and older. Furthermore, this study did not explore gender differences among veteran smokers, which could also be a potential limitation. One strength of this study that I'm very proud of is that no research exists on the comparison of veterans and non-veterans with disability as it relates to tobacco and substance use using this 2021 BRFS data. So not all veterans are eligible for care through the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, or the VA. And we believe that by expanding access to care through telemental health to reach those who reside in more rural communities and regions, though through educating not just the veterans on their rights for ongoing care, but also the private sector medical care facility in which these veterans also have access to, and through increased veteran mental health awareness. Now, the figure that you're looking at it's illustrating that veterans with disability were at a greater risk of smoking and using other tobacco substances. And the current use of ends was not the difference between the two groups, but veterans with disability were less likely to be former e-cigarette users than non-disability veterans. And these are my references that was used in my paper as well as, in my presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out to me through email or, attach to this presentation. Thank you very much.